Hello and welcome to In Conservation, the podcast of the Wildlife Trust for Beds, Cambs and Northants. My name is Sophie Baker and I'm the editor of our members magazine Local Wildlife and host of the podcast. I'm delighted that for this, our final episode of our first season, which has been running now for just over a year, I met with the Chief Exec of our own Wildlife Trust, Brian Eversham, to chat about some of the longest term things that affect our work and the wildlife of our region. From the climate crisis to our work in the field and his own career so far, we touched on ways that people can take action, and how those at the forefront of what can sometimes seem like a never-ending stream of evidence that points to doom and gloom for our planet can stay positive. This is the last in our first series of podcasts, as we're taking a break at the beginning of 2026. If you don't already, please do like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen, so that you can be the first to know when we're back on the airwaves early in the spring. But for now, enjoy!
Right, well this is probably my favourite little bit of the wood.
Oh, okay.
Big elm trees.
Aha, yes. Okay.
So
I didn't know that, so can you point the elms out to me?
it's this lovely sort of stripy grey bark, so very vertical grooves and cracks and ridges. And a certain shade of grey that's slightly greyer than ash or oak would be.
Yeah.
And this is just a pure little bit of elm wood.
Yeah, right in the middle of Camborne.
Yeah, and still just a few of the lovely golden leaves. They do a particularly nice shade of yellow before they fall off for the season.
Yes, I still think a lot of people probably don't think there are that many elms around anymore.
No, we've all suffered from or been trained in elm blindness, the idea that elms have all gone, whereas in fact there are probably more elms now than before Dutch elm disease.
Wow.
And some of them are huge.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Under here, 30, 40 foot trees, closed canopy, proper woodland with elms as the dominant tree. Yeah. This is a place to be.
Yeah, lovely. Fantastic. And we're here to talk about, I guess, roundup of the year, in a way, of the work of the Wildlife Trust. So maybe if you can just introduce yourself quickly.
Well, hello, I'm Brian Eversham. I've been Chief Exec of the Trust since 2009. And this is my 28th year with the Trust, so I feel as though I've got rather a long perspective on this game.
Yes, not all of that time in the top job though.
No, I was Conservation Director for the first 13 years, which was great fun and felt much more hands-on. And some of the projects I kicked off in the 1990s and early 2000s now are actually delivering what we said they'd do.
Oh wow, yeah, that's brilliant. And so what did you do before that, out of interest?
I'd had 15 years in ecological research, and at that time my main theme was climate change. So I wrote my first paper on climate change back in 1986, before it became fashionable, as I'm always keen to point out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and well, I wish it was more fashionable. It feels like it's been quite a hard year in total, doesn't it? Not just for climate change, but you know, just in general.
It's been a very tough year in lots of different ways, and it's hard at the end of the year when you're looking back and you think we've just been through the toing and froing over the planning and infrastructure bill. We've just come through with one of the most depressing COPs, COP30 in Brazil, really didn't get to grips with the issues that we've known about for 30 years. We could have done something about 25 years ago and we still haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. It does really feel like it's been a tough year to work in conservation. It does, you know, to be almost at the front line of the evidence and also of the evidence of people not listening to the evidence. It's hard.
It is. I mean, my experience is people listen and people care. And the problem this year's really brought out is that politicians don't. Politicians have short-term priorities. They've got fashions that they need to follow. They're scoring points off each other. They're making issues out of non-issues. And the one fundamental thing, the climate crisis, they are ignoring. It's the one genuinely existential crisis that we've got to sort out. And we're not doing it fast enough.
No, but people do care. I've seen all of the surveys you see, like you say, people do care. People are, you know, they want it to be addressed, don't they? I mean, and I know, talking to some of our members and supporters, you know, people really do care about this stuff, so.
Yeah, it's almost as if politics is too one-dimensional. They want one top issue. People care about migration. People care about the NHS. Everybody cares about the climate crisis, and it's in their top 3 or 4 issues. It may not always be number 1, but it's there in the background and it's hugely, hugely important.
Yeah, and it affects all those other things anyway. It affects the cost of living crisis and it affects immigration and migration.
Yeah, I mean, if we think we've got a migration problem now, imagine in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time with 200 or 300 million European climate migration people heading in our direction when southern Europe was no longer habitable.
Yeah.
And that's the crisis we're heading for if we don't actually do something.
Yeah, it's big topics, isn't it? But I feel like it's also been a hard year for wildlife, you know, just in terms of the weather and the kind of trends in weather and things that they've had to deal with as well in our reserves. It's been really tricky, hasn't it?
I think what struck me more this year than ever before, and particularly in the last month or two, is the extremes from one day to the next. You can go from a mild November day, 15, 16 degrees, to pretty much freezing all day 24 hours later. And all the way through, we've had these extremes and this cycling back and forth. So wildlife doesn't sort of settle down into a nice steady 3 months of one season and 3 months of the next. So seasonality, as we've known it in the past, is just about gone. It's feeling like it's going to be a tough winter to try hibernating in.
Yeah.
Not that I've got it in mind for myself, but there are days you think maybe that's the answer.
Yeah. I do feel like walking around, even the other day, even when it was still quite chilly. I mean, this is very anecdotal, but you know, there were sort of bumblebees buzzing around. And I mean, that might not be hugely unusual, but it was kind of notable to me. I just sort of thought, oh, what are you doing awake? You know, that seems a bit weird.
We might have to think of it as the new normal, as they say, but to my mind, bumblebees, for most of my lifetime, were insects that hibernated. The workers die off in October, November. The queens hibernate, do nothing until they come out in February or March.
Yeah.
And if they're flying now and there's no nectar sources, they're wasting energy, they're burning their fat reserves, and they may not make it through hibernation. So this could be really bad news for next spring if we keep getting these warm days when there's still not a lot of food around.
Yes, because that's the thing, because the plants don't catch up in the same way. You know, they have their cycles are slightly less immediate, I suppose. They can't immediately respond to a warm day, for example. Yeah,
and the complexities are things we're still learning about. I mean, one of the joys of working with wildlife is that every year is a surprise and you see things you've never seen before. The flip side of that is that many of those surprises aren't that positive anymore. These are things that, inverted commas, that shouldn't be happening or shouldn't be happening now.
Yeah.
And we genuinely don't know where it's going to turn up next.
No. And do you feel that change? I mean, looking back over the time that you've worked in conservation or even just for the Trust, I mean, there must be notable things in that time for you.
Yeah, and the big one that everybody who's got a bit of green space will notice is the growing season's 6 weeks, 2 months longer. I remember the days when you cut your lawn in March or April and stop cutting in October. I'm now seeing people cutting their lawns on Christmas Day and Boxing Day.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the new year. So the growing season is almost all year round.
Yeah.
And that's messing with the biology of a lot of species. They can't cope with that. And in purely practical terms, if you're trying to manage a nature reserve, history is no longer a good guide. Tradition that's worked for 500 years no longer works when planning reserve management. You've got to weigh up each season and do what's necessary that year.
And what effect do you think that's having on the work of the Trust in general? I mean, what sense do you get of that?
I think it's making our research and monitoring work all the more important. We're unusual in charities in that we do put about 10% of our budget into the monitoring and research side. And that means we can actually find out this did work, that didn't work, rather than crossing our fingers and hoping. That evidence base is becoming ever more crucial because you can't rely on, we've always done it this way, so that will carry on working. What worked in the past probably does not work now.
And what are some examples of that? I mean, I can think of the butterfly banks, for example, of that kind of looking at butterflies and how they react to different microclimate. I mean, there must be lots of examples across our work. Microclimate
is probably the biggest one of all, and that will apply to almost all habitats. We'll need to provide shade and shelter for things to get through heat waves. Once upon a time, if I was going out looking for insects, I'd be looking for warm, sunny, south-facing slopes. It's now getting to the stage in a hot summer I'll be looking for cool, shady, sheltered north-facing slopes because that's where the species have moved to. Yeah, it's quite a change, isn't it, really? And in terms of managing our reserves, I think drought is a big one that's happened this year, isn't it? I mean, everything was very dry. Lack of water and excess of water seem to be the two biggest things in terms of, certainly woodland management, don't they, in terms of our reserves teams and what we're trying to do to manage people being able to enjoy the sites as well as wildlife being able to thrive there. I mean, it's just such a massive change to what we have to do. So yeah, with climate change, the total rainfall is not changing very much, but it's becoming very differently seasonal. We can expect summer droughts, but that also means wetter winters. So summer droughts mean we run out of fodder for livestock, the grasslands and meadows are drying up, a lot of plants are dying back and not producing nectar, so we get a sort of summer gap in the nectar sources for insects. And then in winter, the continuous rain that we get in most winters now mean that our woodlands, which are mostly on fairly heavy clay soils, are going to be really difficult both to manage, because you can't get machinery in there, but they're not going to be fit to walk through. And if people walk through a bluebell wood in wet weather and they walk beyond the side of the very muddy path, they're trampling the bluebells, which won't flower next spring.
Yeah, and I learnt this year that bluebells put their leaves up as early as January or February. So it's not just a spring. You think of them as such a spring flower, and that don't trample the bluebells when they're kind of out as bluebells, and that seems easy. You know, you can spot them. You know, but when they're the sort of their winter green, tiny little rosettes of leaves that come up through the leaf litter, I mean, you're not going to know they're a bluebell necessarily, are you?
Those first little points you'll start seeing in January, as you say. And the bulb itself can be 6 inches, 15 centimetres underground. They could have started growing in November, December time.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why bluebells are really vulnerable to climate change. They take so long to produce their flowers for the next season, they can't actually adjust their flowering season by very far. Whereas the oak trees and the ash trees that produce the summer shade can open their leaves maybe a month or 6 weeks earlier. And it could be that bluebells no longer exist as a woodland plant within our lifetimes.
Yeah, and that's quite alarming. I mean, people love bluebell woodlands, so, you know, the idea that that's true should bring people to action, I would hope. You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and it's a genuine shock, because a bluebell wood is a characteristically British thing. I mean, we've got the best bluebell woods in the world. There are small ones in the sort of west coast of France and a bit of Spain and Portugal, but essentially come to Britain if you want to see a proper bluebell wood. And that might not be possible by certainly the middle or the end of this century.
Wow, yeah, that's quite stark, isn't it? You know, and I think and the thing is that that's one small story relatively, and there must be countless stories like that, you know, of different species that aren't going to survive through this huge change that we're going through. You know, there'll be some that can travel, and, you know, we do see new species here, don't we? Like, well, I'm sure there's lots of examples of species that are sort of colonising, who can move, mobile species, but bluebells aren't very mobile.
Yeah, I mean, they've got big, heavy, smooth, shiny seeds. Nearly all bluebell seeds fall within 10, 15 centimetres of the parent plant, and that's generally not a bad strategy. It's a case of mother knows best. Growing next to a bluebell plant is a great place to grow if you're a bluebell, except when it isn't, and in a changing climate it may not be.
Yeah.
And whereas other plants have seeds that stick to passing animals and get taken long distances, or they've got windblown seeds, bluebells are slow colonisers of woodland that move from one piece of stable habitat gradually into a new piece.
Yes.
I've got a real struggle in the future.
They have, because all of our woodlands as well are, well, not all, but they're quite isolated. So even if they do get to the edge of the woodland, they can't cross arable land to get to the next woodland. So even if they were to travel, they're not going to be travelling. So connecting things is really important, isn't it?
That's a really, really big thing. And one of the highlights of this year for me was that actually across our 3 counties and across the whole of England, every county has produced its local nature recovery strategy. Now, it's a long, boring, bureaucratic-sounding name, but that's basically a future for wildlife. It's protecting what we've got, it's creating more habitat, and it's linking together. Now, we don't have the delivery plan, we don't have the funding for it yet, but the idea is there. And like so much in the climate regime, we know the answers, we know what we need to do. The answers are there. It's not hugely difficult. And compared with doing nothing, it's not even very expensive.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that is quite a hopeful thing, actually. What other highlights do you think from this year? What comes to mind for you?
Well, some of it's actually seeing the results of stuff we kicked off a little bit earlier. So last year we bought Strawberry Hill. This year we discovered black hair streaks of Strawberry Hill.
Oh, wow.
And you're talking about bluebells as an immobile species. For many years we thought black hair streak was the least mobile of all butterflies, and it wouldn't even fly 10 or 15 metres to new habitat.
Why is that, do you think?
Most years it's true. They are butterflies that, rather like bluebells, they live in a habitat that suits them, and it's unwise to leave that habitat because the chances of finding a really nice big patch of blackthorn in a semi-wooded situation with just the right microclimate is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
But what we think is happening is in very hot summers, they break out of that tradition and travel longer distances. And it's no coincidence, I think, that we found them at Strawberry Hill a couple of years after 2022, the strongest, worst heat wave this country's ever had. That 40-degree summer was probably the perfect time for black hair streaks to go exploring and find new habitats, and Strawberry Hill is perfect for them.
Yes, and Strawberry Hill is our huge rewilded farm, I suppose, in Bedfordshire. I mean, it is a fantastic project, isn't it?
It's the sort of thing you dream about. 350 acres of scrub that established almost by accident in the 1980s. And we're now seeing it probably at its all-time best with peak nightingales, peak warblers, good numbers of butterflies, amazing wildflowers. And yeah, if ever you're feeling low, just picture Strawberry Hill in your mind and it cheers you up.
Yeah, absolutely. That cacophony of birdsong, which just sort of harks back, doesn't it? Yeah, it is invigorating and hopeful. Yeah. And are there any other sort of hopeful highlights?
Yeah, well, the others are two, I suppose I could call them both engineering projects. So in the Great Fen, we've done our biggest bit of landscaping for a very long time. We've created a range of shallow pools, small lakes, ditches that are going to give us within 2 or 3 years a complete microcosm of the full range of fenland habitats next to a new car park and visitor facility. And we're going to have, early next year, a mobile visitor centre and a unique visitor centre built of wet farming materials. So alder woodlands, reed thatch, bulrushes to make the panels for the building. The whole thing will be a perfect demonstration that you can grow all the building materials you need here in the Fens.
Yes, in a way that's sustainable with the climate and also with wildlife as well, isn't it? That's the trick there.
Yeah, and we've been piloting wet farming in the Fens because we believe that's the answer to the loss of peat. And at the moment, peat soils are probably responsible for half the carbon dioxide produced by UK farming, and we can stop that as a stroke simply by raising water tables and demonstrating you can grow food crops and other crops with a high water table instead.
Yes, absolutely, because the Fens, for anyone who doesn't know, are a drained landscape, aren't they? I mean, all those ditches and drains are there literally to keep the land dry, and yeah.
Exactly that, and as England's largest lowland wetland, it was a huge expanse of peat that had taken between 5,000 and 7,000 years to build up and has taken about 200 years to decompose and evaporate.
Yes, it disappears at quite an alarming rate once you realise how long it takes to build up. I think that is, it's one of those, again, those alarming statistics.
Yeah, and we've got hard evidence on our own land in the Fens that before we re-wet it, the peat's going at 2 centimetres or more per year.
I mean, wow, there mustn't be much left in a lot of the places.
No, the deepest we've got is probably 3 or 4 metres, when once upon a time it might have been 8 or 10 metres deep.
Yeah.
And an awful lot of it's down to its last metre.
Yeah.
So one generation farming and then no peat. And very poor clay soils as a result. So from a farming point of view, now's the time to save the soil and find a new way of farming on wet peat.
Yes, so that is a really hopeful project, isn't it? There's peatland progress?
Yes,
yeah.
So this is nationally funded by the lottery, topped up by Natural England with money from DEFRA. Great project and really transformative. And the restoration work that that's doing at Speechley's Farm is actually going to join together Wood Walton Fen and Home Fen, the 2 national nature reserves, the reasons why the Great Fen is where it is. And we can join those 2 pieces together this year, next year and the year after. Yeah,
that's amazing. And yeah, just fantastic to see the work happening so fast there, because I know it was a 100-year project when it first started, wasn't it? The sort of ambitions of what could happen over that time period, and it's 25 years, I think, isn't it now? That's where
right.
We're at. Yeah,
25 years in, and we've probably achieved 60% of what we set out to do. So it's going well, and the public support for it's been absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, fantastic. With any more highlights?
Well, I mentioned the Great Fen as an engineering project where we've actually created these pools and ditches and the rest of it. The other engineering project is in Northamptonshire at the Nen Wetlands, where a year ago we introduced beavers. This year those beavers have reproduced, so the first beaver kits for probably 800 years is my best guess.
Yes.
And the adults have not only built the dams and lodges that you expect, they've also started building canals. And they're taking down big trees and small trees. They've cleared the trees from a reed bed area, so they've restored a reed bed for us in 12 months. Yeah. They've created new pools. They've linked pools together. Yeah. So massive engineering, vastly improving the habitat, improving the carbon and the water storage. So again, this is adaptation for climate change, mitigation for climate change, better for wildlife and really good for local people.
Yeah, the local people seem to love it. I mean, we do run beaver safari tours over at the Nen Wetlands for anybody who's listening who's interested, but I mean, you have to be quick to get on them because they seem to be selling out very quickly. I mean, where you sort of do, because these beavers are in an enclosure, just to be clear for anyone who's listening who hasn't followed along with the project. And yes, we do sort of do behind the scenes tours where you can go in and see all the nibbled sticks and the amazing engineering work that they're doing. yeah, it's a very exciting project that it was.
And calling at the visitor centre, you can actually see the camera footage of what the beavers get up to at night.
Yeah.
And it makes the thing really personal. You can actually recognise the individual beavers and see what Boudica's been doing recently.
Yes.
And so it goes, and what Alan, the adult beaver's getting up to.
Yeah.
And to have that happening within 50 metres of one of the largest shopping centres in the country, 7 million visitors a year, that close to beavers rewilding their own landscape, it's just tremendous.
Yeah.
And it should remove any fear that people have that beavers are going to damage things. They're not. They're actually about making floodplains work as floodplains, reintegrating rivers to their surroundings, and managing wet woodland in the way that it had been managed for thousands of years before people removed the beavers.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that's Rushton Lakes. So anybody who, just wants to go and have a look, you certainly can. And just also for anyone who is following along on the beaver story, we were saying 400 years when we first started, weren't we? And what's the new evidence or the new thinking around 700 or 800 years?
Most literature says 400 years were the last English beavers,
right?
But the last ones were in Yorkshire, Northumberland. And there's no evidence at all in the Midlands since about the 12th century.
Right.
So I'm sticking with 800 years.
Yeah. I mean, it does make sense, doesn't it? I just wanted to clarify because I feel like the numbers have changed a little bit as we've been talking about it, but I think it does make sense. Very exciting project.
Has a love of nature and our wonderful local wildlife been an integral part of your life? Has it helped to define who you are and how you exist in the world? Wildlife has the power to inspire, move, soothe and excite us, generating awe in everyone regardless of age and individual differences. Leaving a gift in your will to the Wildlife Trust BCN will turn your love of nature into a long-lasting legacy, enabling wildlife to be protected for the future health of our planet and the awe of generations to come. Recent legacies have supported the initial management of our newest reserve, Strawberry Hill, improved our grazing infrastructure for vital livestock meadow management, underpinned the next steps in reconnecting habitats within the Great Fen, and brought people closer to nature through our community and education activities. We know you'll want to look after your loved ones first, but if you're thinking of putting together or adjusting your will, maybe whilst you're in the process of buying a house, planning a family, or just revisiting your legacy, we would be honoured if you would consider us. Find out more by visiting wildlifebcn.org/legacies. Thank you.
Yeah, so those are the highlights for this year. Do you have any sort of favourite things from the longer term? Because obviously, you've worked for the Trust for a long time, if you don't mind me saying. And, there's obviously the Great Fen has been a long-term project. Is there anything else that springs to mind, like in your time working here?
I think the joy of the job is actually seeing a place transform gradually over time. Strawberry Hill, we came in 30 years into the restoration and it's fabulous on day one. But I don't allow myself a favourite nature reserve, but I've probably got a top half dozen that I spend time at. And at Old Sulahay, we created 30 acres of limestone grassland back in 2001, 2002. And Samox Hill is now as species rich and as good as pretty much any limestone grassland you could see. And the idea behind it was, when we started, the only surviving bits of decent limestone were either road verges or ex-quarry sites that are very much a hill and hollow sort of topography, which you couldn't use machinery on. Samox has two large flat fields where you can send in hay balers, which will actually collect the seed source, and you can use it to restore grasslands elsewhere. So we've now got the perfect place to propagate, to create more grasslands in other places. So where our local nature recovery strategies talk about linking the limestone grasslands, we've provided the wherewithal to do just that.
Yeah. And I think, like you say, you mentioned earlier about local nature recovery strategies, very long-winded name for something that is very hopeful, but the Wildlife Trusts have been quite intrinsic in the process, haven't they, in terms of helping to get those things together and advising?
Yes, I mean, we know our local patch better than most people. We know the species and the habitats. We've worked with the local record centres, which we host and which we help set up. So we got the best possible evidence to produce maps that are real, We know where the wildlife is, we know where the soils are that can support other habitats, and how we can link them together. As I say, with all of these problems, the answers are fairly clear. We've got the technology, we've got the knowledge, we've got the evidence base. We just need the funding mechanisms to make it happen. And compared with not doing anything, both for the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, these are cheap and relatively quick solutions. We just need some sensible long-term political vision. And that's probably what we've been lacking for the last 20 years.
Yeah, and also to be clear that these solutions aren't harmful to the human populations. They're beneficial, fundamentally, like essential, I would say, even, aren't they, to the human population?
We're having this conversation in Cambs.
Yeah.
This is a place which is far more wildlife rich now than it was 30 years ago when it was entirely swathes of intensive arable farmland. 5,000 houses, all the people that go with that, and it's much better for wildlife too. And the people of Cambs enjoy having access to quality green space. The one thing that saddened me about Cambs is that when we kick-started the project here back in the early 2000s, it was seen as a dynamic new idea and a really good example of how housing and wildlife could fit together. 25 years on, it's still seen as one of the best examples, and there are very, very few others. We shouldn't still be talking about Cambs, we should be talking about 30 other new villages which have got as much wildlife as Cambs, and they don't have. That makes them less good places for people to live.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said before, it's not like the solutions aren't there, you know.
No, and even the house builders have said all they want is a level playing field. They want all house builders to have to build to the same standard.
Yeah.
I'd say make that a high standard with good quality green space. And grey water recycling and energy efficiency and all that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? I mean, a lot of these things do.
We could have done it 25 years ago. The next best thing is to do it now.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. In terms of that though, how do you cope personally with having that knowledge, you know, being on the front line of that knowledge? And the fact that we didn't do these things 25 years ago. How does that...
You could get really depressed about it. And when you hear senior ministers blaming the bats and the newts and the snails for the economic failure of the country, I mean, it's childish and silly. And we know it's not true. And not many people believe it. The house builders don't believe it. They've been working with conservation charities for decades. We know we can get it right. I suppose the thing that encourages me is that when you talk to ordinary people, the people get it. They care about climate change. They care about their children's future. And they're as frustrated as I am to see politicians thinking so short term that they're willing to undo the good work of the last 20, 30 years by coming up with a planning and infrastructure bill that would tear up half the protection for natural environment. Anybody who's watching COP in Brazil knows that fossil fuels are the primary cause of the problems that we're facing on the climate side. For COP not to say we've got to phase out fossil fuels rapidly is a dereliction of duty. It's the fossil fuel industry dominating the agenda, the media going along with it, the politicians going along with it because they want a consensus. That consensus is not going to make a habitable planet for our children and grandchildren.
No. I was buoyed to see recently some graphs, though, about how human development happens, how things change for humans. And the graph is never slow incremental change. The graph is always nothing, status quo, sudden change. Like the pressure builds up and then the status quo can only hold so much, and then things change suddenly, and then suddenly everything is different again, and we look back and think, well, how did we ever do it like that before? You know, whether it comes to the internet, that was a sudden change. Whether it comes to industrialization, sudden change. You know, all of these things are sudden, and so that gives me hope. It feels to me like the pressure is building. And it might not feel like it's making change happen yet, but the pressure is building. And at some point, it's going to go pop.
I think the pressure also and the opportunities. So we have air source and ground source heat pumps, we have electric vehicles, we have solar, we have wind power, we have other countries investing more in those than we're doing and making a difference.
Yeah, and the economics of that as well are just hard to deny now. It's cheaper.
Remove the subsidies from oil and gas and coal, and you discover the planet should be running entirely on solar and wind. We do need a step change in battery availability and storage. That's on its way. And within 5 or 10 years, we could have made that transition. I mean, net zero by 2030 is now probably escaping us, but for so many industries, we know that we want to do it, we know that it can be done. We just need a bit of government encouragement to make it happen.
Yeah. How do we get that government encouragement, Brian? What do you recommend? What can we do?
I think for anybody who's listening, get to know your MP. Despite what we may think of them, politicians want to do good things for people in general, and in particular, they want to be re-elected. They don't get re-elected by offending their voters. So if their voters say, this is really important to me, do something, most politicians will start doing something. I've met a fair few MPs over the last 6 months, and most of the newer MPs are saying, keep talking to me, tell me what we can help with, what can we do to help you? They're interested in our agenda, partly because they've already had that ripple of interest from their voters. And so many of our local MPs have a parliamentary majority smaller than their Wildlife Trust membership, which I've occasionally bothered to remind them about.
Yeah, too right. Yeah.
So politicians can make the difference. At the moment, they're heading in the wrong direction. They need knocking back into shape and in line by popular support and sympathy. And I think the feelings are out there. We just need to get them clearer and focused and louder.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of conservation organisations, environmental organisations seem to be pulling together a lot more in recent years in some ways, you know, to kind of to put their weight collectively behind the same message, which we all know when you work in this sector, you know, we all do striving for the same things, but I think sometimes publicly it's not necessarily as visible that that's true, but I feel like it has been in recent years. I think people are pulling together more.
Yeah, I think the climate crisis is now so blatant. Every year we see more extreme events. We see the driest this, the wettest that, the coldest, the warmest, and we see species changing all around us and habitats changing and tree diseases expanding at a faster rate than ever before. You can't ignore it. All conservation bodies are facing exactly the same threat, so it's not surprising that we're coming up with just the same solutions.
Yeah.
And again, local nature recovery strategies written by local people, consulted with local people, with all the local wildlife charities and the councils and government agencies standing side by side saying, this is the future that we want and we need.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have, you know, what do you wish the population of Beds, Cambs and Northants were doing more of for wildlife? Is there anything?
If you've got a garden, the easy thing to do is a little bit less. Be a little bit less tidy, leave a little bit longer grass on the corner of your lawn, don't bother tidying up your borders before the winter, leave them there for your ladybirds and other insects to hibernate in. If you've got space to plant anything, the two plants I always go for if there's room is a willow for very good nectar sources very early in the season, so those queen bumblebees coming out of hibernation in February have got something to feed on. And a little bit of ivy that you allow to flower, so you've got that late nectar source in October and even into November when insects need it before they go into their rather shorter hibernation period these days.
Yeah, because I always think, you know, it is quite alarming when you look at a map from above, you know, looking on Google Earth or something. I'm sure other mapping things are available. And you see, you know, nature reserves are so vital and so important, but they make up such a small percentage of the actual land in a county. You know, and it just feels more and more important that the nature reserves are kind of the little pots where things can survive, but they need to break out from there, and they need the opportunity to be able to spread from those places. We can't just confine them to those places. They're like the last bastions of their most ideal habitat, but we actually want things to spread out.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the other thing I think people can do for wildlife as well as for themselves is actually get out into wildlife. If everybody who hears this makes a point of getting out once a month, once a week, once a day if you can manage it, and just go and walk into a bit of green space, you'll feel better, you'll see more wildlife. If you see something unusual, let the local record centre know. But if you see wildlife on a daily or a weekly basis, you'll start caring that little bit more, and people who care more will do more.
Yeah, I think feeling connected to green spaces is something that we gained a little bit in those dark days of lockdowns that people kind of were exploring around their houses, and it feels like it slips away again, doesn't it? If people have sort of stopped doing that again, everyone gets back to their busy lives and, you know, goes in their cars and drives around. But yeah, taking that time to actually just have a little walk around and look at the trees. You know, we are nature. It helps us feel better being in nature, and in this Elm Woodland, certainly, which I didn't even, you know, layperson that I am, Yeah. Are elms your favourite tree? Right.
They are at the moment. I've spent 7 years studying elms in greater and greater detail, and they're hugely neglected. Most people don't think they're there anymore. We're standing here under 40, 50 foot Huntingdon elms with one of the best examples of the woodland elm just down the ride there. They're a really diverse group. They've got loads of insects feeding on them. They've got loads of rare fungi feeding on the dead bits. And they're beautiful, shapely trees. We need more.
Yeah. And what's your other favourite area of wildlife? Do you have like what are your top 3 areas of wildlife that you study? Because you don't just run a wildlife trust. That's not your whole identity, is it?
Yeah, that's really the day job. I spend far more of my life actually looking at wildlife, I think, than I do running the wildlife trust.
Yeah.
And it's moved around over years. I mean, as a teenager, I was a bird watcher. In my 20s, I was probably more a botanist than anything else. Then I got into insects, and for 20 or 30 years, insects, particularly beetles, and also molluscs, were things that I spent a lot of time looking at. And I discovered a few years ago that if I've not got very much time for field work, I can collect stuff and look at it at home. And I have at home what I call my amoeba zoo. It's plastic crates with little plastic zip bags in there with hands full of moss. And in each of those hands full of moss, there are tens of thousands of microscopic organisms. And I can pick out a plastic bag, sit down at my microscope, and a single drop of water can keep me happily entertained for 6 or 8 hours.
Wow.
It's what the Victorians did before televisions. And oddly enough, I don't have a television, but I do now have a microscope and lots of little plastic bags.
That's amazing. And they just exist there.
Yeah, they're in crates with little aquarium lights over the top of them. The mosses carry on growing. The amoebae and the tardigrades and the rotifers keep doing their stuff.
Yeah.
And you can take them out, borrow them for a moment, have a good look at them, pop them back in there, and they'll be there in a year's time.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I've got New Forest tardigrades and Scottish rotifers and Yorkshire amoebae just sitting in my spare bedroom.
That's fantastic. I think that's what a great way to, much better than a television. I mean, it's much better than Netflix because it's real and it's happening right there. I think that's fantastic. Do you know many other people who do that?
I would have said not a few weeks ago, but I've actually rediscovered Facebook in the last month. And there are Facebook groups for amateur microscopists with 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 members.
Wow.
And I've started to see familiar names from East Anglia and from Northamptonshire actually on there.
Okay, so there is a community of people.
An undercover network of microscope specialists. And next year we have our first ever wildlife training workshop on microscopes. Yes,
I was going to bring that up actually because I remember seeing that on the schedule there. Yeah, so if you're interested in getting to know how to use microscopes and how to find things in the bit of moss growing on your garden wall, I mean, it really could be that local, couldn't it?
Yeah, and you can find species new to your county or even new to Britain in that handful of moss. There's wildlife out there that hasn't been studied in depth for a century. Let's bring back the Victorian microscope trend. Get everybody looking down a microscope in 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. Here. So elms and microscopic organisms. What do you think is next for you? Is there a next, or are you too busy in the midst of those things at the moment to think about that?
Elms are shaping up into a book, and I'm hoping that will be out within 3 or 4 years. And when that's out of the way, then that might have done elms. The microscope stuff could go on for a very long time.
Yeah.
And if I had a bit more time on my hands, I'd quite like to get back into beetles, because there's been a whole new series of beetle books come out in the last decade, and I've not made enough use of them yet.
No. And Mike, you're from Yorkshire, aren't you? Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. And what drew you away from Yorkshire?
Work. So I moved down to London for a year on a short contract, and toward the end of that contract, a job cropped up in Cambridgeshire. So I worked at a research station in Cambridgeshire for 15 years, and while I was there, I was running evening classes for local universities, and most of the Wildlife Trust conservation staff came on one of my evening classes at about the same time that their conservation director handed in his notice and moved over to Wicken Fen, and it seemed a natural thing to move sideways to join the trust.
Yeah, and do you miss Yorkshire?
I go back there a few times every year. I spend my birthday in May every year on the peat bog. In the old days, it was listening to nightingales. Sadly, Yorkshire no longer has any nightingales, but now it's listening to nightjars, which arrive a fortnight earlier than they did when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow.
So there are nightjars in a good year, there are spotted crakes calling. I should say this is a long nocturnal walk across the peat bog. And I've been doing that since I was 11 years old. So that's a real lifetime's tradition.
Yes.
And I try to go a couple or 3 times during the year. outside of those times to catch up with old school friends and do a bit of survey work on the peat bogs.
And what do you feel are the main differences? I mean, I know they're quite different landscapes, aren't they? Sort of Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire, Northamptonshire even, and Yorkshire. I mean, what?
Well, oddly enough, my corner of Yorkshire is the flat, I won't say boring, but the flat bit before you get to the dales or the hills. And it's a flat landscape of peatlands.
Right.
So I grew up with lowland acidic raised bogs. I then spent the rest of my life on the edge of the Cambridgeshire Fens, which is the other large expanse of lowland peat in Britain.
Yeah.
So I've been a peaty person all my life.
Peaty person, yeah. That's great. Yeah. So being in charge of something like the Wildlife Trust, it must be quite, do you find it difficult? Is it a difficult thing to be doing, you know, because you've worked here for quite a while already. Hopefully the Wildlife Trust will be around for a long time. I mean, how does that work for you?
It takes a long time to find out that what you started 10, 20, 30 years ago is actually doing good and did deliver what you said it would. So I've mentioned the Great Fen a few times. We're now seeing the habitats developing in the Great Fen in the way we predicted they should do when we kicked the project off in the early 2000s. I mentioned Samex Hill. We created the grassland. It was species poor. It's gradually accumulated more species over time. And I think there's an important point here that conservation is a long-term game, and sticking with similar sorts of themes over a long period is actually hugely important. This year we launched a new 5-year plan. The big themes of it are the big themes of any Wildlife Trust 5-year plan. It's about restoring nature. It's about involving people and enabling people to make active, positive contributions. And these days, slightly phrased differently from what we may have said in the past, it's about demonstrating that nature provides the answers to our problems. So nature-based solutions, helping deliver nature recovery, and working for local people. And that's not very different from the plan we published in 2000.
No, but knowingly so. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? You know.
And continuity is hugely, hugely important. If we change a direction every 5 years, we've got something seriously wrong.
Yeah.
And some things actually are all the more important because they've been happening for a long time. One thing this trust, I think, does uniquely well is training workshops, teaching people about wildlife in depth. And we've been running 30 to 50 training workshops a year for the last 25 years. I've run over 200 myself. I was just looking it up. My first training workshop, I think, was in 1990.
Wow. Yeah.
So I've got 35 years of running these events. They still attract an audience. They attract a diverse and often quite young audience who are ready to be inspired, who want to go and make a difference. And we can give them the skills to do that. And you could set up a project to run workshops for 2 or 3 years, great. But if you do it for 30 years, your patch has a population of trained, skilled volunteers able to monitor wildlife and to manage habitats in a way that they wouldn't do if they'd only had a couple of courses decades ago.
And some of whom actually go on to deliver their own courses, I believe, as well.
Yes. Happiest experience this year was to hear that a chap who came on one of my slugs and snails courses as a 15th birthday present with his father.
Yeah.
That was about 10 years ago. This year he's actually running identification courses on sphagnum bog mosses, some of the most difficult of plants for the Field Studies Council in Scotland.
Wow, I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? That's, yeah, the real continuity, but that shows you the longevity though, doesn't it? And,
it takes a long time, but it's well worth the effort.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps us going.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Thank you very much for your time and for taking me to this little corner of Cambourne and the little elm pocket, which I didn't know existed and which I hope people can come and find themselves. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And on a sunny, wintry afternoon, seeing the sun streaming through the elm woods, I feel an awful lot better than I did an hour ago. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you to my guest Brian Eversham for his time and for such a brilliant overview of the work we're doing as a trust over the short and long term. You can find out more about the amazing projects Brian mentioned, as well as the wildlife training workshops which are open for booking now, over on our website and the page dedicated to this episode at wildlifebcn.org/podcast. If you've been inspired to support the work we're doing, please do consider becoming a member or donating to our Wilder Future Fund. Every penny makes a huge difference to your local community by supporting our work looking after its wildlife and wild places. Find out more at wildlifebcn.org/support us. I am, as always, extremely grateful to James Williams and Jared Wentwick for the podcast music, and to my colleague Holly for helping with the sound. As I previously mentioned, the podcast will be taking a short break at the beginning of 2026, but we'll be back with more brilliant wildlife stories from across our 3 counties in the spring. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and have a wonderful festive period and a happy new year.